Welcome back to Open Line tonight. We are talking about the pork report from the Beacon Center. I have Ron Schultes here, the Director of Policy for the Beacon Center. Thank you once again for being here. This is an interesting conversation. Some of the highlights of this report, of the 25 things that you all uncovered, are a bit funny in what they are, and we'll get to those. Some of those are just really sad because this money could really go to things that are needed across the state, particularly kids and schoolwork. But I do want to look at two of the things that you all highlighted in this pork report that kind of filter back to Nashville. One of those is the funding for the Tennessee Arts Commission.
That's right.
$6.5 million.
It's a lot of money.
Sure is.
For arts. And we always hear about starving artists, and yet somehow there's a few out there that are getting well paid with our state tax dollars. And look, we want our cities to look beautiful. Nobody would deny that. But you know what I think people care most about first is making sure they don't get a flat tire from a pothole on their way driving into work, right? And this is a great example. It all boils down to misaligned priorities, core functions. What do we give our tax dollars to the government to do, and then how are they actually using that funds for things that really you shouldn't be focusing on if you can't pay your bills? And that's what a lot of it boils down to, and the art example is a great example of that. That fund gets spread out all across the state, but the majority of it ends up in Nashville as well as Memphis, and that's an issue that we have as well. The idea that somebody in Mountain City is paying their hard-earned tax dollars for an art project in Memphis that they'll never see, that doesn't benefit them at all, is hard to swallow, I think, for a lot of people.
And also the fact that, you know, Memphis, Nashville, both built on music.
Right.
Everybody knows that. People come here directly for that.
Exactly.
And yet we continue to pour money right over the top there.
Right. It's what it's known for, Music City, right? And yet the fact that we need to somehow pay tax dollars, millions of dollars to try and bring awareness to that, you don't need to fund that to know that that's what it's known for. You go to anywhere in the country and you say Nashville, they think country music and probably bachelorette parties.
That's true. Yeah, now they do. Let's also talk about the State Funding Board. This is an entity that manages the financial functions of state and local governments. Recently allocated tax handouts to 4 companies.
That's right.
3 of those already in Nashville.
That's right.
Why are they doing handouts to companies already here?
That's a great question. We always hear with these handouts and incentives to companies is that it brings new jobs here. But what we see often is the case is that they're just giving money to companies that already exist here. We've seen this time and time again where it's not really about bringing a new company and new jobs to the state, or better yet, connecting our existing Tennessee residents with the jobs that already exist. But we're just giving money to companies to just for little reason, just because they're here. I mean, we saw this, another example is FedEx in Memphis got millions of dollars to just move their headquarters down the street. FedEx is tied to the hip with Memphis. When you think of FedEx, you think of Memphis and vice versa. And the idea that we need to give money to Memphis to move their headquarters like we've seen with Bridgestone here in Nashville, that is not what these types of deals are for, even if we should be doing them at all.
And it's really kind of picking winners and losers among corporations.
Absolutely. We see this all the time. We did a mini documentary several years ago in Memphis about an IKEA that moved into the Memphis area. IKEA is great, don't get me wrong, but they got $8.5 million to start there. We did a documentary, showed literally right across the street was a family-owned furniture store that had been there in Memphis for at least a decade.
Wow.
They didn't get a handout, right? But now they're being forced to subsidize their competition right across the street. The government should be a referee, create a level playing field, and not picking winners and losers, but that's unfortunately what happens many times.
That certainly is. Again, folks, if you're just joining us, I kind of want to reset since we're here at the half hour. We're talking with the Beacon Center. This is Ron Schultes, the Director of Policy, talking about its annual pork report. This is what it looks like, and folks get a copy of this if they want it.
You can go to our website, beacontn.org, and download it right from there.
It is an easy read. It's really kind of a funny read. It's written pretty sarcastically because we are talking about fraud and waste, and some of these examples will just blow your mind of really on the fraud part, what people tried to get away with. And we'll dig into that here in just a second. But I like it because usually when we talk about budgets and numbers, especially in the millions of dollars, it will make you go cross-eyed trying to read these reports, just like you were referring to the state budget, kind of going through that with a fine-tooth comb to find some of these examples. But this really boils it down to just like straight in your face, we can do better.
We do the boring research so you don't have to.
Thank you. Thank you so very much. So tell us exactly again what the Beacon Center is.
Sure. So we are a free market think tank. So what that means is we're nonpartisan, nonprofit, and what we seek to do is make sure that your government, both at the state and local level, are not getting in the way of living your life. And that's what we see too many times, where bad government policies make it harder for their own constituents to get a job, keep a job, start a business. And what we seek to do is remove those barriers and hurdles to allow them to live their version of whatever the best life is for them.
And sometimes you guys march up to Capitol Hill and you guys are, really pushing for certain bills and proposals that you think will do those sorts of things.
Absolutely. Whether it's getting a better school, or just bringing more attention to waste that could be spent on helping others, or making it easier for those to start a business, or tax reform. We tackle issues all over the spectrum.
Yeah. You helped write this report. What are some of your favorite examples of waste in here?
My favorite is probably with Shelby County and their podcast.
Oh, this was awful.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yep. Shelby County, in an effort to make it easier for people to plug in and watch what's going on at the council level, which is a noble effort,
sure,
right? Paid over $100,000 to a company to start a podcast.
A podcast.
Right. How many 15-year-olds do we know on YouTube that make a podcast with one microphone and a camera for
exactly
$200? We have our own at the Beacon Center called Decaf every Friday. You should check it out.
Okay.
It's really funny as well. Two of my coworkers host it. And I can guarantee you it didn't cost us anywhere near $100,000. But because governments are using not their own personal money, maybe it'll be a great podcast, but they're not so concerned about is it done in a cost-effective manner, because they know the next year they're going to get tax dollars again. Nothing happens. There's no consequence to this. That is probably my favorite example from this year.
And the real kicker is they already live stream the meetings.
Absolutely.
So if you want to be plugged in, you can go watch them.
Right.
You don't need a play-by-play.
Right.
Or the recap or the replay on the podcast.
It's essentially we're paying for like the Sports Center highlights now of the Shelby County Commission meetings.
That's a bad one.
Right.
Okay, what else tops your list?
Definitely the park with the visitor center that was built. Essentially, a visitor center was paid for in one of the state parks out near the Memphis area, and found out that the building next to pretty close to a fault line, so something you want to be attention to, was not earthquake proof, and so they had to tear down the whole visitor center and rebuild it to be earthquake proof. Lost $700,000 in taxpayer money. Oh, and by the way, the nonprofit that was in charge of building the facility and picking the builder did not do a proper bidding process, and so you kind of wonder why. Oh, well, you didn't do a proper bidding process. You got a bad builder, and then $700,000 was lost.
And has there been any effort to recoup that money, or to say you have to pay this back?
No, this is just one of those things where, oh well.
Oh, dang. Okay, let's go back to the line. Reverend Fuzz is on the line. Hi, Reverend.
Hey.
Hi, go ahead.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I got a tough question here.
Okay.
This really has bothered me, and I'm glad this guest is here to help me with these answers. The other night I just thought, wow, here are 4 things that are deal breakers for our politicians. How can we support them and trust them? One of them was the $1 billion, was it TANF fund? Some kind of money the state had piled up.
Yes. Yep,
and
TANF.
I want to ask your guest, does he know what's happening with that? One of the things I don't think should happen is that the person who got caught robbing the bank should decide what to do with the money he stole. And I'm not saying he stole it, but I'm just saying, what's the process? What's happening with that? Who are these nonprofits who makes the decision what nonprofit gets it? And I was just so disturbed that our legislators were not on top of that and have not come out publicly to say we need to go and take everybody out of the Capitol or something. You just need to be responsible. And I'm seeing, and then the other question was, how do you think Nashville really got into a place where we are saying the city is broke? Because I keep seeing all these buildings and skyscrapers, and surely you get a building permit that should bring in lots of money for a building permit. What do we need to do, and how is this city broke? That just didn't add up to me, and I hope you'll share some thoughts about that.
Okay, I'm going to hang up on you, Reverend Fuss, so you can listen to the rest, and I think that we could go on for the rest of the 25 minutes just about these two topics.
Sure.
Let's first talk about the TANF funds. That's a great one. It's something that your group worked to expose, kind of stumbled upon, and it has been a couple of months now, so there has been some action taken on that front. But if you want to kind of bring us up to date.
Yes, thank you, Reverend. Actually, that was those $732 million in TANF reserves was something that actually we originally brought light to through a report that we published end of October.
Yes.
Obviously, it got a lot of both local and even national attention.
And let me just pause. This is federal money.
That's right.
Given to the state of Tennessee to dole out to basically poor families to help them get a job, stay in a job, get to the job, provide child care.
Right.
I mean, no nonsense things.
Yep. Last year, for example, the federal government gave the state of Tennessee $190 million, of which around we use 70 of it. And so the rest of it has continued to accumulating there, in a fund. And, you know, we as a conservative organization obviously want to make sure that spending is held in check.
Sure.
But these are funds that are specifically given to the state to actually help people become wealthier, and so that way, you know, they're able to work their way off of the state's welfare system.
Government assistance.
Exactly. The idea for these programs is that they're a hand up, not a hand out. And the sad part is, you know, we've seen a lot in the news around the Medicaid block grant that the state has filed. TANF, the state already has a lot of flexibility to create innovative programs, and unfortunately those funds have been sitting there not being used when we could be doing some really great things to further help our residents.
Okay, so step one was you guys brought it to light.
That's right.
Some lawmakers immediately pounced on it and said, what are we doing, particularly Democratic lawmakers, and you know, called for heads, and there's been a circling of the wagons, and now there has been some decisions made of what to do with the money and how to start doling it out.
Correct. So the TANF is managed by the Department of Human Services. I think they've come out with a plan for a portion of the funds, and then currently our state lawmakers have created essentially a TANF study group, and they're working right now to come up with a plan to use for the rest of the funds. I believe their plan is to get down to a reserve of around 300-ish million, because you want to have some in case a recession hits, and you need those funds. Exactly. But I think they're working on a plan to address the vast majority of those reserves, and so we're hoping to be part of that conversation, and I expect us to be.
And one thing, Reverend Fuzz, that you mentioned, you said, I hope the same people aren't in charge. Well, right now they are.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they are. And then also, and I think this is, he brings up a great point, so many people are scratching their heads. How does Nashville, this booming city, cranes everywhere like you mentioned, high rises going up, everybody's coming here, how are we broke?
Right. We're in the greatest economic boom this city has ever seen, and we're in the worst financial state.
Yeah, it doesn't add up.
It doesn't, where we know that if on our kitchen tables, if you got huge raises, you would be able to do some great things. You wouldn't go further into the hole, right? I think that, you know, this is obviously, like I mentioned, a problem that's happened over decades.
Yes.
Right, so this is something that isn't a recent phenomenon, but I think it goes back to so much of that growth, even though it would have happened regardless, maybe not at quite the same pace, was bought and paid for. So, for example, like that TIF that I mentioned for that building across the street, yeah, absolutely, they're paying a lot to build that building. They're paying in building permits, but the problem is 95% of the property taxes that they pay don't go into the city fund, and that's how you end up with a long-term budget problem like we have now.
I mean, it sounds like to me, at some point when we needed to revitalize downtown, these TIF deals started to be handed out, but it wasn't cut off at the right time. We didn't say, all right, we're moving in the right direction, we've got good pace now. We just kept handing them out.
Right. And you know, there's also and I understand the problem for our council members, they're expected to help try and bring jobs to the city, right? But there is better ways to do that. It's creating better roads, better infrastructure, better schools. A great example of this is Alliance Bernstein, another company that received money to come to Nashville. They said in their press conference the reason why they came here was a great great environment, a great place to raise a family, lower traffic, at least compared to New York City, right? At least compared to there, better weather, better taxes. It wasn't about the money that they received. So it's better to create an environment that fosters that growth rather than essentially trying to pay for it and build it up front.
Absolutely. When I was looking through this report, at least this year, it seems a lot of examples come from Shelby County, the Memphis area. Do you find habitual offenders that are like the worst when it comes to fraud and waste? It is.
Our report is always, the majority of examples are the Memphis and Nashville area. And obviously that makes sense too. There are two largest cities, largest budgets. So you're going to have that. That's just part of the nature of the beast. But this year tended to be a little bit more Shelby, Memphis focused. Last year I think it was a little bit more Nashville centric and focused with some of the issues in Nashville from last year. So, but it's usually a large portion comes from those two. But we always make sure to highlight examples from all across the state as well.
Okay, and we're going to talk about some of those when we come back. We'd love to have your phone calls too. 615-737+ is the number to call. Stay with us.